Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Terumos, Halacha 1, Chapter 1, and this is part 9 of this year. This is the last part of Halacha 1, Chapter 1, and in the Art Scroll we're on 8b2. Now, we're getting into what about a minor. Today we're going to be getting into the person who is underage, and we know in Torah law there are issues with somebody underage that they can't do certain activities because they don't have understanding. Now, there's a three-way dispute going on here. There's Rabbi Meir, who is saying that a minor cannot separate out truma. And then the other question is, well, what about consecrating an animal? And he's saying that he can consecrate an animal when he reaches the age of vows. And the idea is that there's something a little bit different going on between what's in the pile of truma and with something with consecration, with donating something to hekdesh. Now, we're going to get into other cases about differences. The other case that we have is Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says something very special. He's saying that inside of the truma, wherever it is within it, even before he separates it out, it's already there, and all this minor is doing is moving something from this pile to this pile. He allows the underage person to separate out truma, and he does not allow the person to designate something out for hekdesh, because he says that this hekdesh, in other words, consecrating something, is going to be for anybody an entirely new sanctity that did not exist before. And then we have Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi is saying that this separation of truma or this sanctification is effectively like a neder. It's effectively like a vow. Now, Rabbi Yehuda's position is really logical. I mean, it really makes a lot of sense. He's really saying that, look, hekdesh is really just something that's a totally new consecration, right? How this person can't do it because he doesn't have understanding. But in the pile of truma, that truma was always there. The Torah says you have to separate it. Inside of there, somewhere, is going to be the truma. Now, why is it, and we know that the halacha is going to be by Rabbi Yossi. It's not going to be by Rabbi Yehuda. In there, so there's a lot to learn from it. It's not like that. It's going to be by Rabbi Yossi. And why is it going to be by Rabbi Yossi? Why is it going to be more like a vow? Well, the idea is that somewhere in the Terumos, you might have Terumos, and that's true that you're just separating it out from here to there. And yes, maybe it's not a new consecration, but the idea is that a vow can be annulled, and that consecration by the minor can be annulled. And that is why it's going to be by Rabbi Yossi and not by Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yehuda's designation, that somebody could come along and undo that consecration for the truma, and it's undone by the minor. And in the case of that, that's going to look more like a vow, because you can undo vows. And that's why it's by Rabbi Yossi. So the Gemara looks more about this maloket with Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir's opinion is very easy. They're interesting. He's saying that it is also like a vow, but there's some nuances. First of all, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Rav Kana don't necessarily agree on the reading of what Rabbi Meir is saying. And also another thing about Rabbi Meir is he's saying that there's a textual verse that's going to make this, yes, like a vow, but is going to make it where consecrations are going to be limited because of the way the text is written in the Torah. So the Gemara has this dissent on Rabbi Meir's opinion. Rabbi Yochanan says, even according to the one that's going to be Rabbi Meir, who says that a minor cannot separate out truma, he can nonetheless consecrate an animal as an offering when he reaches the age of vows. So again, according to Rabbi Yochanan, this is the Mara Fulda's insight, that a minor's neder is effective and it's going to make an object forbidden to him biblically. But Rabbi Meir is going to agree, according to Rabbi Yochanan, that even his hekdesh consecration is valid and endows the object with sanctity on the biblical level. Nevertheless, Rabbi Meir disqualifies the minor, even the one who reaches the age of vows, from separating out truma, because he's understanding scripture as excluding a minor from truma separation. By the way, I said that the text is going to disallow from the consecration. I made a mistake when I just said that. I meant that it's going to be limiting him on the truma consecration, the truma separation, not a consecration to hektish. So Rabbi Yochanan is basically pointing out that in a scriptural exposition that Rabbi Meir is saying that a minor is going to be specifically excluded from truma, but he's going to be allowed to consecrate hektish. In other words, ordinarily he'd be allowed to consecrate truma, but because of this scriptural passage in the Torah, that's what limits him. And the idea that some of the Rishonim are going to do to provide a rationale for treating truma more stringently than nedarim and hektish is going to be that a minor who has reached the age of vows is capable of creating restrictions through nedarim, and similarly through consecrating an object to hektish. So in the case of a neder, his vow renders the object prohibited for benefit, and in the case of hektish, his consecration renders it sacred, and it's going to be prohibited for private use. But separating truma does not merely sanctify the truma portion and render it prohibited to non-kohanim. It's also going to render the other side, the tevel produce, permitted for consumption. And that's the deep idea here. Rosh points that out. And basically the Torah is empowering a minor to initiate new restrictions through a vow and consecration, but it's not going to empower the minor, the underage person, to rectify tevel and render it prohibited. Now, Rabbi Yossi's point's a little bit different. Rabbi Yossi also is going to say it's like a vow, but he's going to say it's a little bit different. He's going to say that even when separating out truma, the principal effect of one's declaration is to sanctify the truma, and the tevel becomes sanctified merely as a consequence of the truma's sanctification. So any minor who's capable of making a neder is also capable of separating out truma. So again, there's three opinions, and Rabbi Meir is going to disqualify every minor from separating out truma. Rabbi Yossi is going to accept a minor who's reached the age of vows, and Rabbi Yehuda is going to accept the eligibility of every intelligent minor. Now, again, there's a maloket on the reading here between Rav Kana and Rabbi Yochanan. They disagree as to exactly Rabbi Meir's opinion with regards to the hektish part and also the nedarim. According to Rav Kana, Rabbi Meir is disqualifying a minor from consecrating to hektish even when he has reached the age of vows. And according to Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Meir considers him fit once he reaches the age of vows. And as far as Rabbi Yehuda, he, by the way, is going to consider any intelligent minor fit to separate out truma, even, by the way, before he reaches the age of vows. But they can't make a neder, or they can't consecrate to hektish. Why? Because Rabbi Yehuda's point was you're creating something new. Inside of Rabbi Meir's opinion, Rabbi Meir is saying that you're limited by, and this is not the halacha, you're limited by scripture for minors' truma separation, while yes, you can separate out the portion for truma and render it forbidden for everybody else except for the kohen. The problem, Rabbi Meir says, is the other side that you've fixed the tevel. So fine, this pile you've prohibited with a vow, that's okay, he would say, but the problem that makes it an issue that the Torah has to specify it is because this other pile you've now cleaned up from the tevel prohibition, and a minor, he says, doesn't have the power to do that. And Rabbi Yossi, who the halacha is going to follow, says that, in fact, the act of separating out truma is the point, and it's just a consequence of fixing tevel, and that's why a minor, according to Rabbi Yossi, can do it. A lot of interesting ideas here for us to learn how this works in a deeper way. The Gemara moves on and it says, what type of offering can a minor consecrate? And it says that he can consecrate an animal as an olah or shelamim. By the way, those are going to be voluntary offerings. but he cannot consecrate and bring a chatas for eating chalev. In other words, eating chalev, these are the forbidden fats. And by the way, that gets a correct punishment. And the idea is, if you've inadvertently eaten it, can you bring a chatas? They're saying no. And I'm sorry, if you've done it intentionally. By the way, also unintentionally. So the idea is, can if this person committed this kind of transgression, can they bring this kind of offering and consecrate it for an atonement? And they're saying no, it's not valid. And the idea is, Gemara says, because he has no liability to a chatas for eating chalev. In other words, he's a minor. If he ate chalev, he doesn't get punishment. He didn't have the understanding. He's not qualified for that kind of mitzvah. So he didn't transgress a correct level prohibition. So therefore, he can't consecrate it. It's not going to take effect. That's my mother-in-law's phone. Anyway, the Gemara continues and says, similarly, he cannot consecrate and bring a chatas for consuming blood because he has no liability to a chatas for consuming blood. In other words, an adult who is going to eat blood intentionally gets correct. So somebody who does it inadvertently is going to be liable to a chatas offering, and he's not going to be liable. Why? Because if he ate blood, he doesn't have liability. The Gemara is going to look about other offerings. It's going to say, what is the law regarding whether the minor who has reached the age of vows can bring an offering for his ziva or an offering for his saras? A ziv or zav is going to become tamei when they get 3 emissions of ziva. It's basically gonorrhea. And the Gemara says that they're required to be purified of the ziva, and they're going to bring a pair of bird offerings. One, by the way, is going to be a chatas. The other is going to be an olah. And you can see more about that in Vayikra 15:14. And then a metzora is going to be somebody who gets saras on their skin, and they have to leave the community. They have to go outside the camp, and they have to bring offerings, including an asham, a chatas, and an olah. And basically, they're saying that for the adult, they're certainly having to bring these, but what about for a minor? So the Gemara says, do we say that since each of these is an obligatory offering, as the zav and the metzora are obligated to bring their respective offerings for purification, that a minor cannot consecrate and bring it, for a minor is never obligated to bring an offering? Or are we going to say that since a minor became tamei through either one of them, by saras or ziva, that he can consecrate and bring their appropriate offerings? And basically the question saying that, is a minor not obligated to make required offerings if they have something that becomes tamei? Minors, by the way, can become tamei. So maybe you want to fix that tuma, right? So the Gemara says, and it answers, it says, it should be obvious to you that he can bring such an offering since he is subject to the tuma that necessitates it. In other words, logic dictates, as a Rosh Cirilio, that the Torah affords even a minor the opportunity to become completely purified of his tuma, and imposing on him a burden of waiting until adulthood in order to be pure, would run counter to the dictum that the Torah's ways are the ways of pleasantness. This, by the way, is in Proverbs 3:17. And although the minor's father can theoretically bring offerings on his behalf, the father is not obligated to do it. And so if the minor is an orphan, he would be faced with the unpleasantness of having to wait until adulthood. So you're seeing here that they can purify themselves, and they can do things in order to purify themselves. That's an interesting insight, and that's not a restriction limited to being a minor. And the Gemara is going to comment further, and it's going to say, what is the law regarding whether the minor can become an agent for these offerings? In other words, whether the minor who reaches the age of vows can consecrate an offering on behalf of another person who is a zav or metzora. Notice, by the way, that Rabbi Yossi's point is that the minor can start to do these things at the age of vows. Now, are we going to say that since he became tamei, says this Gemara, through either one of these tumos, and can also consecrate the offerings for his own sake, that he can similarly become an agent for consecrating these offerings? Or do we say that since a minor cannot become an agent for all other matters of the Torah and other matters of Torah law, that he cannot become an agent for consecrating these offerings for a ziva or a saras? In other words, he can do this for himself, but can he do this for someone else? And the Gemara is going to reject the notion that a minor can become the agent in these cases. Rabbi Yudan said, how can you even consider the possibility of a minor serving as an agent? He says, why, the law is that a minor can have tevel that requires tithing under biblical law, and according to Rabbi Yossi, by the way, and by the way, according to Rabbi Yudah, in our Mishnah, he can separate the tithes from his own tevel. But everybody agrees, says the Gemara, that he cannot separate tithes to exempt his fellow's tevel according to biblical law until he becomes adult. So here we can see that even when a minor is subject to a certain law, he can't serve as an agent with respect to others for that law. So there's a limit for the minor. And the Gemara says here too, regarding the offerings brought for the ziva or the saras, although a minor can become tamei through them, he cannot, and by the way, he can consecrate his own offering for them. The Gemara says he cannot become an agent for others to consecrate the offering. So the Gemara is concluding that a minor can do certain things for himself, but he can't serve as an agent for separating out truma. He can't become an agent for anything else that he, by the way, can perform on his own behalf. And the Gemara is going to ask further. It's going to say, what is the law regarding a minor who's reached the age of vows? Can he bring Beurim from the produce that grew on his own field? By the way, Beurim is, this idea here is going to be that if you have a minor and he owns some land, he grows produce from the 7 species, then the question is, normally, if it's an adult, they have to bring, and they're obligated to bring the first fruits as Beurim. Just the question is, would that be for a minor? So the Gemara is asking, is a minor who reaches the age of vows able to designate his first fruits as Beurim and bring them to the temple if he wants to do it? So this is going to get back to Rabbi Meir's view, as understood by Rabbi Yochanan, that a minor cannot separate out truma, but he can consecrate something to hektish once he reaches the age of vows. And according to the Vilna Goan, he's going to explain this like this. According to the Tanaim, who hold that a minor can separate out truma and consecrate kodesh, that, by the way, is going to be Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yudah, he surely can designate Beurim. And conversely, according to Rabbi Meir, that a minor cannot separate truma nor consecrate kodeshim, Rabbi Meir, as understood by Rav Kana, it's going to be obvious that he cannot designate Beurim. So this discussion, by contrast, is according to anyone who holds that a minor who's reached the age of vows can consecrate an offering. That's going to be Rabbi Yossi's view. So the Gemara says, according to Rabbi Yudah, who says that Beurim is compared to the holy items of the provinces, like truma. In other words, truma fruits are called holy items of the provinces because they may be eaten outside of Jerusalem. But regarding kodeshim, which can only be eaten in the temple courtyard or in Jerusalem, and as explained before, that Rabbi Yudah is going to hold that the scripture is going to link the law of Beurim and truma. So the idea is that since Beurim and truma are going to be linked in the Torah, according to Rabbi Yudah, the Gemara is going to say that the minor cannot bring Beurim just as he cannot bring truma. So accordingly, Rabbi Yudah in our Mishnah is maintaining that a minor can separate truma, and accordingly, there's no question that a minor would also be able to bring Beurim according to him. But the Gemara means that if Rabbi Meir, who holds that a minor cannot separate out truma, is going to agree that Rabbi Yudah's understanding of the Beurim verse, then the minor will not be permitted to bring Beurim. And the Gemara continues, and it says that according to the rabbis who say that Beurim is compared to the offerings of the temple, the minor can bring Beurim just as he can consecrate an offering. In other words, we get back to Rabbi Yochanan's interpretation of Rabbi Meir, who's saying that a minor cannot separate truma, and he's going to agree that he can consecrate an animal as an offering once he reaches the age of vows. And according to Rabbi Yochanan's view of Rabbi Meir, it's going to mean that the rabbis are saying that bikurim is comparable to truma, and it's going to be comparable to the offerings of the temple, so that a minor can consecrate his first fruit as bikurim. But if the bikurim is comparable to truma, then the minor is unable to consecrate bikurim. So according to Rav Kana's understanding of Rabbi Meir, a minor can neither separate truma nor consecrate anything to hektish, and so therefore he would not be able to do bikurim. By the way, that's opposite to Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yudah, who hold that a minor who's reached the age of vows can both separate truma and consecrate items to hektish, and by the way, also consecrate things to bikurim. Gemara is going to ask another question. We have a few of these, and then we're going to end. And the Gemara says, what is the law regarding a minor who's reached the age of vows? Can he consecrate and bring a chagiga offering? Or are we going to say that since an obligatory offering, he cannot consecrate it and bring it, because a minor is never obligated to bring an offering? Or are we going to say that since one can change it to become designated as a shelamim, that the minor can consecrate it and bring it, just as he can consecrate a regular shelamim? By the way, the Gemara doesn't answer it. On one hand, so if for some reason, by the way, the chagiga is not offered during the festival, that it could be offered after the festival as a regular shelamim, because it's essentially a shelamim. Shelamim is going to be a voluntary offering. On the other hand, since the minor specified that he designated the animal as a chagiga, which, by the way, is an obligatory offering, and the minor is not subject to the chagiga obligation, then the consecration should not take effect. But on the other hand, since a minor can consecrate an animal as a shelamim without any liability, maybe he can consecrate as a chagiga as well, since it essentially involves endowing an animal with shelamim sanctity. In other words, he can wait until the festival passes and then use it as a shelamim. There's another question that also is going to get left unresolved. The Gemara says, what is the law regarding whether a minor who's reached the age of vows can consecrate and bring a Pesach offering? Are we going to say that since it's an obligatory offering that he cannot consecrate it and bring it? Or are we going to say that since Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said in the name of Rabbi Yudah Nasiya that one can bring a Pesach offering during the rest of the year and change it to become designated as a shelamim, that it's going to indicate that a Pesach is essentially in the category of a shelamim, and that the minor can consecrate it and bring it just as he can consecrate and bring a shelamim, also unresolved. In other words, although the Pesach offering has some different laws than those of a regular shelamim, it's basically the same kind of offering, and he can actually have it be converted to a shelamim. So because he can have it converted, maybe he can designate it as a Pesach, and then it gets converted over to shelamim, and maybe that's why he can do that. It doesn't get answered. The Gemara is going to ask another question. What is the law regarding whether the minor who's reached the age of vows can consecrate and bring a masa behema offering? In other words, this is going to be the animal tithe, and you're biblically obligated to separate a tithe from cattle, sheep, or goats born each year. That's going to be 1/10 becomes sanctified as a masa behema. It's going to be offered as a sacrifice in the temple, and it's going to be eaten by the owner, and it's in the class of kodashim kalim. So kodashim kalim. So the masa behema offering also is going to be a type of shelamim, but there's some differences. The Gemara is going to be asking whether a minor who's reached the age of vows can tithe his animals and consecrate every 10th as a masa behema. So the Gemara is going to resolve this, and it's going to say, if Rabbi Meir holds that when the verse states in the plural, from all your tithes, it's teaching that all tithes are comparable to one another. All your tithes, by the way, is going to be Numbers 18:28, and it's going to be saying, so shall you also separate the truma of Hashem from all your tithes, and you should take that you take from the children of Israel. So he's basically understanding it to say that all tithes are comparable to one another. The Gemara continues and says that we may conclude that just as a minor cannot tithe grain, according to Rabbi Meir, so too he cannot consecrate and bring a masa behema, according to Rabbi Meir. Now, again, that's according to Rabbi Meir. And, the Tanaim who do rule that a minor who's reached the age of vows can separate truma, then they would also be able to consecrate a masa behema as well. The Gemara is going to ask further. It's going to say, what is the law regarding whether a minor who's reached the age of vows can affect a Tamora. By the way, if a minor who's reached the age of vows designates an animal as a Tamora, that's going to be the substitute, by the way, then for an animal that was previously consecrated, does that Tamora take effect and become sanctified? So Tamora is going to be a substitute of an animal. Torah talks about it in Vayikra 27:10. And it states that it's forbidden to designate a substitute for an offering, but if you do so, the original offering retains the sanctity and the substitute also gets sanctified. So the substitute is called a tamora, and it gets the same designation. So if you did it as an olah, it would be an olah. If you got it as a shalamim, it would be a shalamim. And whatever the original offering was. And the Gemara is going to ask whether a minor who's reached the age of vows can affect the tamora. So according to the Vilna Goan's take on this, the question is specifically whether the minor can affect a tamora for a shalamim. So in considering that a minor can initially consecrate a shalamim, the question is, can he also consecrate a tamora as a shalamim? In other words, presumably that, if this got lost or misplaced, this offering, can he put a substitute? Does he have the power to do that? And that's a very good question. So the Gemara is going to resolve it. It's going to say, if Rabbi Meir holds that all ties are comparable to one another, so just like the masa behema is comparable to the masa of grain, then we conclude that just as a minor cannot bring and designate a meiser of grain, then so too he cannot consecrate and bring a meiser behema offering. And since the law of the tamora is juxtaposed in Scripture to the masa behema, we can conclude that just as a minor cannot consecrate and bring a masa behema, he also cannot affect a tamora. In other words, that according to Rabbi Meir, that since Scripture links it together in Vayikra 27:32, that basically, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't take effect. The Tanaim who hold that Rabbi Meir is not correct on this are going to hold that a minor who has reached the age of vows can separate meiser of grain and consecrate kodashim, and then therefore it would affect the tamora as well. I don't mean to say that Rabbi Meir is not correct. Rabbi Meir is correct, but that's not the tradition. So the Bavli in Tamora 2b is going to pose the same question, by the way, and there's going to be a slightly different take on why that would be valid or invalid, depending on how you're going to do it. The logic is a little bit different. So the Gemara is going to look at the law of Tamora twice. First, it sets out the law in general, and now it's going to go and look at the Tamora of the Maisa Behema. So just as a minor cannot consecrate a Maisa Behema according to Rabbi Meir, so too he cannot affect the Tamora. That's teaching that he cannot affect the Tamora for a Maisa Behema offering. Gemara is going to address whether a minor can affect the Tamora for other offerings. And the Gemara says, and if Rabbi Meir holds in accordance with Rabbi Shimon, because Rabbi Shimon says that Maisa Behema was singled out with respect to the laws of Tamora in order to teach about all sacrifice according to the law of Tamora, then we can extend the reasoning as follows. Just as a minor cannot bring and designate meiser of grain, so too he cannot consecrate and bring a meiser behema offering. And just as he cannot consecrate and bring a meiser behema offering, so too he cannot affect a tamora for meiser behema offering. And finally, just as he cannot affect a tamora in the case of meiser behema, so too he cannot affect a tamora in the case of any other consecrated offering. That's going to be where, once we've determined that a minor cannot affect a tamora with a meiser behema offering because of the juxtaposition of the tamora to the meiser behema, we can apply Rabbi Shimon's principle that the law of tamora in general is derived from those of meiser behema. So we can conclude that just as a minor cannot affect a tamora for a meiser behema offering, so too he cannot affect a tamora for any offering. And the Gemara is going to ask about the status of offerings that are consecrated by a minor who does reach the age of vows. And it says, what is the law regarding whether one is liable for slaughtering his consecrated offering outside of the temple courtyard? Now, let me explain this a little bit. So somebody who shechts the offering anywhere outside the temple courtyard is liable to karet. If he does it intentionally, and chatas if he does it unintentionally. This, by the way, is in Vayikra 17:3, and the Gemara is going to address whether this is going to hold true to a minor who consecrates an offering, who reaches the age of vows. So the question is, says Amara Fulda, whether the minor's consecration is valid according to biblical law, in which case if somebody slaughtered it right outside the temple, he'd be liable, or is the consecration valid only at the rabbinic level, in which case if somebody slaughtered it outside the temple, he would not be liable to a biblical penalty. Very, very good question. So the Gemara is going to present conflicting views. Rav Kana says one is not liable for slaughtering the minor's sacrifices outside the temple courtyard because a minor's consecration is valid only by rabbinic law. And Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish say, and they both agree, that one is liable for slaughtering his sacrifices outside the temple courtyard because a minor's consecration is valid under biblical law. So basically, these two Amorim are saying that if you shecht it outside, it's going to be by biblical law. Rav Kana says you can't shecht it outside, but if you did do it outside, it's going to be prohibited by D'Rabbanan law. And the Gemara is going to challenge this form of view. It's going to say, now this ruling of Kana contradicts the view of the Tana, Rabbi Yudah. Kana and Tana rhyme, right? Anyway, so according to Rabbi Yudah, a minor can exempt his tevel by separating the required ties, and even according to biblical law. So accordingly, will Rav Kana actually say this, that a minor's consecration is valid only on a rabbinic level? So, Rabbi Yudah in our Mishnah is validating a minor's teruma separation, and is implying that he deems the minor's separation valid in every case, even when he sanctifies produce that's biblically considered tevel. So therefore, a minor's ability to separate truma is of biblical origin, since a minor's ability, again, according to Rabbi Yudah, his ability to designate truma derives from the capacity to affect a neder. So we can see that his nederim are biblically binding. And the question now is going to be, is that going to be valid on a rabbinic level? Or is it going to be, if you look at the minor's consecration to hekdesh as, biblically valid, well, then it's going to contradict the opinion of Kana, where it's going to say that the consecration is valid only on a rabbinic level. So the Gemara's mention of Rabbi Yudah's opinion, where he validates the truma separation of any minor, is going to be, by the way, even younger than the age of vows. And Rabbi Yudah's allowance of the minor below the age of vows to separate truma was stated specifically regarding truma, but not to hekdesh. So the idea is gonna be that Rabbi Yudah or Rabbi Yosei is going to hold that the rule that a minor who has reached the age of vows is of biblical origin. So how can Kana now say that it's going to be rabbinic? So Rabbi Kana understands Rabbi Meir, who invalidates a minor's truma separation, as holding that a minor also cannot consecrate to hekdesh under biblical law. And Kana is maintaining that according to Rabbi Meir, the rule of a minor who has reached the age of vows is rabbinic. And the idea is that Rabbi Kana's ruling here is going to be at odds with the opinion of Rabbi Yudah and Rabbi Yosei, and consistent with the opinion of Rabbi Meir. And basically, Rabbi Kana is going to be holding that the halacha follows both and Rabbi Yudah and Rabbi Yosei in their disputes with Rabbi Meir. So the Gemara is going to answer this and basically say that Rabbi Kana holds in accordance with the one who says that during the Second Temple period they accepted the obligations of Terumos and Maestros upon themselves voluntarily. So Gemara says biblically all produce is exempt from the Truma and Meiser obligations nowadays. And the fact that Rabbi Yudah validates the minor's Truma separation nowadays does not indicate that the minor's actions are valid on a biblical level. So when Ezra came back, there was a question that comes up in Shviah 6:1. Is the Truma and Maestros going to be biblical? So according to the people who say that the resanctification of the land of Israel in the time of Ezra took effect on a biblical level, are going to say that the mitzvahs are also going to be biblically in effect. And according to the other view that say that the biblical sanctity of the land lapsed when the first temple was destroyed, and it was not reinstated at the time of Ezra. Rather, Ezra decreed a rabbinic sanctity on the land with regard to truma and maestros. And so this rabbinic sanctity remains effective today. And just as Ezra's resanctification was not biblically at that biblical level, because the majority of the nation didn't reside in Eretz Yisrael, then the Gemara is suggesting that Kana is going to hold with this view that the truma obligation nowadays is rabbinic. Now, this is also going to be, by the way, Rabbi Yochanan's view in Shvius chapter 6, Halacha 1. They're going to be saying that nowadays Terumos and maestros are going to be rabbinic. This also, by the way, comes up in Masechet Damai. And the idea is very, very clever. Rav Kana, who looks like he was on the outside of this debate, is actually really agreeing with Rabbi Yochanan's view, ultimately, because he's basically saying that, look, when you're looking at these ties that kind of minor, affect tevel, and is that going to be, on the biblical level or the Darabanan level? He's saying, look, in the time after the first temple, it's all Darabanan, and in the time of the biblical level, well, he's saying that that's what the Tanaim are talking about. But in the time now, Ezra only sanctified it on the rabbinic level, not on the biblical level. So because it was sanctified on the rabbinic level, basically Rav Kana is pointing out that all of it is going to be Darabanan. So it really is going to be like Rav Kana. Rav Kana is really right. Have a great day.